You're listening to All Kinds of Catholic with me, Teresa Alessandro. My conversations with different Catholics will give you glimpses into some of the ways we're living our faith today. Pope Leo, quoting St. Augustine, reminds us, "Let us live well, and the times will be good. We are the times." I hope you'll feel encouraged and affirmed, and sometimes challenged, as I am in these conversations. Join our podcast community, get news and background information about the conversations, and share your thoughts if you want to. You can get the newsletter and each episode straight to your inbox by going to allkindsofcatholic.substack.com and clicking on subscribe. It's free. That web address is in the episode notes too, and I'd love you to draw closer to our community. Thank you. Listeners, thanks for joining the episode today. We've a voice from Scotland today, and I'm really interested to hear what Andy's going to tell us about his work and his life and his faith. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So from our conversation just before we began recording, Andy, you're somebody who hasn't always been a Catholic. Would you tell us a little bit about how you came to be a Catholic then? What happened there?
I grew up in loosely the Church of Scotland. I was baptised in the Church of Scotland. But to be honest, we didn't really practice as a family. We would only go at certain points through the year. Eventually, by the time I was about 8, I just kind of fell away from it. Didn't want to go to church and really wasn't interested in religion at all. I grew up in a part of Scotland, in the west of Scotland, which suffered from a lot of sectarianism and a lot of kind of social divide from that. I grew up never meeting a Catholic until I got to university.
Wow.
They were never on my radar. They were never something to think about, or that there wasn't another way to think about Christianity other than the Church of Scotland. But as I said, I wasn't really interested. And then I went to university. I bumped into my first Catholic, which was a bit of a strange thing because, growing up, I'd never met anyone, so it was a bit exotic. Maybe just very interesting. I ended up marrying that person, so that person's my wife, Catherine. So she started to talk to me a little about God, and we were actually just friends at this point and getting to know each other. And my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. And at that point, I didn't really know what was going on. I had some kind of awakening about, okay, now I want to look and explore God in my life because this is quite a big event. I was about 20 at this time. And I'm thinking, I just don't quite know how to cope with the potential loss of my father. I tried going to the Church of Scotland and something just didn't feel right now. There was nothing wrong with it. It was perfectly fine. It's not a criticism whatsoever. But it just didn't sit right with me. And I don't really know why. So I started talking to Catherine about this, who were just friends at this time, and she mentioned, well, why don't you try coming to Mass with me? And my first answer to that was absolutely not. I can't, coming from where I'm from, I can't go to Mass. That's just not an option. She said, if you don't want to come to Mass, why don't you come to this place in Motherwell? It's called Carfin Grotto. It's a Lourdes shrine, so it's quite a big thing in the area. So I went there, and from having a really kind of hectic life, really worrying about my dad's health, I walked in there and walked around the grounds and seen the glass chapel, and suddenly just felt an overwhelming sense of peace come over me. So I didn't really know what was going on, but it was probably the first time I didn't feel like my life was in turmoil at that stage. My dad's cancer developed and became terminal, and he sadly passed away. And I found myself then stepping foot in a Catholic church for the first time and going to a Mass, and I didn't have a clue what was going on, but I just found this profound sense of peace, this energy going through me, and I didn't want to leave, and I had no idea what was happening. And I'm looking at the Mass unfold and just in awe of everything. I just didn't want to lose that feeling, and I didn't want to leave the church that night. People were standing up, sitting down, kneeling, and then it was the sign of peace. And Catherine hadn't warned me what the sign of peace was, so everyone was saying, peace be with you, and I can't quite hear them because I'm kind of caught up in the energy of it all, and I'm just saying, how are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? Instead of peace be with you, Catherine's kind of nudged me. It was wonderful. After my dad had passed away, I just found great comfort in the church, and I thought, I need to try this out, actually. Maybe this is just an experience of church that everybody gets, and I'll try going back to the Church of Scotland. And I didn't feel it. I didn't get that same sense of being at home. There's nothing wrong with the Church of Scotland, and I'm very happy that people find God that way. But for me personally, it just felt as if God was nudging me in the way of the Catholic Church.
If I can just jump in there, Andy, there's so much there. Thank you so much. I'm very moved listening to you, partly because actually I lost my father to lung cancer also. But I like your description of finding peace and energy in the church, in the Catholic Church, because lots of people talk about feeling peace when they go into church. Lots of people talk about finding the truth there. But the energy, I can understand what you mean by that. I feel that too in many Catholic churches. When the parishes gather together, there is a feeling of energy amongst people. So that's great to hear about. I think the Lord has a sense of humour that you married the first Catholic you met. That's fantastic.
It did help that she was very beautiful, but...
Of course. And I'm interested too, for some of us listening who haven't grown up in a sectarian area, the idea of this difficulty between Catholics and other denominations, Protestant denominations, being so strong, this kind of division being so strong, and a feeling of not being able to go into the church of the other denomination, that could be hard for us to understand. It's interesting to hear that from you and to hear how you've overcome that, and to hear you speaking respectfully too of the other denominations there is really important. So that's a really great start to our conversation. Thank you for all of that. Perhaps we might talk about, you've found yourself in a Catholic church and you find that it's speaking to you. You actually became a Catholic. So how did that process happen for you? Did you follow the RCIA programme?
I fought it for a while. I thought I could just go to Mass. And I thought this will be enough. And then I don't have to tell anyone. I can just go in secret.
Like Nicodemus.
But of course, that doesn't work, because once you start to understand more and you start to see that the Eucharist is the actual body and blood of Christ, I mean, how can you not want that? Walk away from that. So it took me a little while. So I did RCIA, but I did it outside of the normal time. I went to the midnight Mass at Christmas, and wherever I sat in a different seat. There was a prayer card, and it was for someone who'd lost their father. And it just felt like a bit of a sign that I need to take this a bit more seriously, look into this a bit more. So I left that Christmas Mass thinking that I know I need to change now. I need to become a Catholic. I spoke to my local church. They said, well, they didn't really want to hold me off because, as you said, I seemed to be full of energy. So I did RCIA at the wrong time of year, and then was received into the church in 2010 at the first week of Advent, which has had to be approved by the bishop and things like that, because it's usually the Easter Vigil that you do that. But I was also consuming books, is the best way to put it, about the church, about the early church, how the church got going. I'm really interested in early Christianity and how a small movement develops. And, I did that when I was studying theology at university as one of my main interests. But despite everything that I've read, which validates my experience, it's that energy that keeps me going. It was that energy that was the driving force, essentially, to keep things going. So as much as I've got a lot of knowledge now, it's that feeling that I get that makes me know I've made the right decision.
In your gut?
Yeah.
Stepping outside the conversation, listeners, I want to build the sustainability of this podcast mission. And if you can contribute to this work of lifting up the voices of ordinary Catholics, please consider a paid subscription. Go to our Substack site to do that. But if not, all our content remains free, and I'm glad these conversations are here for you. Let's get back to this one. Now, there's two things I'd like to talk about next. You're working for the church now for many years, and it would be good to hear about those roles and what you get from doing that. But also family life has been important to you. And this is something that you share. You share about bringing faith into mundane, everyday family life. I've seen that on your social media that we'll talk about. So let's do the family life first. So tell us a bit about your family and how you're sharing faith within your family and what you think is important there.
I married my wife Catherine in 2012, and we've got three boys, a 12-year-old, a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old, with the 6 and 7-year-old being born almost a year apart, which was a lovely surprise. The youngest one was born just as COVID began. That was quite a challenge. So he was baptised in Sacred Heart Church in Edinburgh on a Sunday, and then the full country was in lockdown by the Thursday, and all the churches were closed. It was like the last celebration that we had before a couple of years of tough, challenging times. COVID wasn't easy for us for a few reasons. So my wife actually has multiple sclerosis. We didn't know that at the time. So just after she had Harry, who's the youngest one, she started to have real problems with her back. Just as we got into COVID, one of the discs in her back shattered. It wasn't an emergency in terms of it wasn't life or death, so there was no operation in the NHS to fix it. So she ended up in a wheelchair for 9 months. So I was working from home, trying to keep the parish alive, trying to look after my wife, trying to look after young children. Just when I look back in that, I don't think I could manage that without the ability to see God in those moments, in those moments of difficulty. Because in actual fact, although some people might look at it as being challenging, I didn't really see it that way. I was upset that my wife was in so much pain. We were happy actually because we had each other and we had God, and it wasn't miserable like you might think it was. It was actually really life giving, and I was able to care for my wife, and because I was working from home in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do had COVID not happened. And the same with my youngest son. During that time of getting scans and things like that from my wife's back, just a miracle really that a doctor managed to look at the scan and seen something he didn't like. Noticed a lesion on my wife's brain. After a few months, it transpired that she had multiple sclerosis. They caught it really early, so they've made a lot of progress with MS over the last 10 years. So there's no cure, but there's treatments that can put in place that slow the progress down, and that's been working really well for Catherine. She actually gets more problems for her back, and she's had her back surgery now. She still has terrible problems with her back, but in the sacrament of marriage, really what I signed up for was to be there when things weren't so good and were challenging, but we were actually still happy through it.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. I think for people who are going through difficult times like that, it's lovely to hear how faith can make that experience a positive one, that you can focus on the things that really matter and find a way through that and feel supported by your faith. That those relationships with your family, your wife, your husband, your children are the most important things, and that you can be grateful for the time to spend with them and those things that really make a difference to life and make life meaningful. So I'm grateful for you sharing that, and I hope that's helpful for some listeners who may be in situations of struggle. It sounds really tough. I'm moved again by you speaking of it, framing it as not something miserable and difficult, but as something that has been life-giving. So tell us a bit about the work then. You mentioned there working from home a little bit. Tell us about the work that you've been doing in the church, which is really interesting as someone who wasn't a Catholic until you became a Catholic, and then actually you've worked in roles that support the church or support the work of the church. What kind of things have you been doing then?
So my first role in the Catholic Church was as a provincial youth and young adult ministry coordinator for the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. So they had a couple of parishes in Edinburgh at that time, several parishes throughout the UK and Ireland. I'd only been Catholic for like 2 years, and when I went to the interview, they must have liked me. The interview was the day before my wedding, actually. I was thinking, well, if I don't get the job, at least I've got my wedding to look forward to and my honeymoon. So I spent about 4.5 years working for them. It was a great experience. I got to do a lot of good work in the church and help a lot of people setting up youth groups, soup kitchens, doing retreats, taking young people on activities like mountain climbing and gorge walking and all different things, and just helping people tap into their faith. I've went to Lourdes a couple of times to help with the sick and the pilgrimage there for the Oblates. That was a wonderful experience as well. And I walked the last 250 kilometres of Camino de Santiago twice during my time there. We came up with the idea to do Holy Week differently. We could walk the last section of the Camino de Santiago, arriving in the cathedral in time for the Easter Sunday Mass, which seemed like a good idea until you realise you're walking 25 miles a day. But in actual fact, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. I did that for a few years, but it was a provincial job, so I was like a week in Edinburgh, a week in London, a week in Dublin, a week maybe in Anglesey, going to the retreat centre in Crewe, getting sent to France and then Spain, and I think it was about 6 months out of the year that I wasn't at home.
That's hard.
That was hard, and my wife is my best friend, so I really missed my wife. But then when children start to come along, it starts to become more jarring when you have to leave. So when my oldest son George was born, he was on the phone and he didn't quite understand what was going on, and he just said, "Daddy gone."
Oh.
And I thought, I can't do this anymore. I need to look at something else. And when I got home, the Archbishop in Edinburgh had asked anyone involved in youth ministry to a meeting to see how he could explore things and develop things and work together cohesively as a diocese to try and give more options for young people. So I went along to that, and I bumped into Father Peter Scally, who was a Jesuit we got talking and I told him a bit about my role and he said, oh, we're actually looking for someone that is a pastoral associate. So I went to the interview and I got it without any problems. Having worked in parishes and done all the work within the church that I'd done, I was able to walk into that role quite easily. And I was excited to do that as well because it wasn't just youth and young adult ministry, it was the whole parish. And that was a new challenge. And I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure I'm one of the only lay people in Scotland that has that kind of role. Because when I try to explain it to anyone, they have got no idea what I'm talking about. So they always go, so are you training to be a priest? And I'm like, no, I'm not training to be a priest. I'm married, I've got children.
That is interesting, Andy, isn't it? Because I think for a long time in the church, pastoral work was done by priests, wasn't it? We kind of thought that's what the parish priest is for, and the assistant priests, they're there to do the pastoral work. And of course, things have changed. Lay people are taking on pastoral roles now, but I suppose it takes a while for people until they've met a few people doing those roles and seen what that looks like. I suppose people struggle to understand sometimes what that actually can mean.
So I've been in that role for just about 10 and a half years now. And I'd say it took maybe a good 5 years for people to get, everyone was really welcoming, but they were still thinking, could you ask Father such and such if you can do this or you can do that? Actually, I can tell you if you can do that. I'm not, because I'm part of the leadership team. But now it's fine and it all runs smoothly. And working with two great priests, and we're a really good and effective team. And we meet weekly to explore all the pastoral needs of the place and then implement it really. So I'm delighted to be where I am now. There's minimal travel, which means I kind of get the best of both worlds. I get to work in the church and actually make a living out of it, which is really a blessing, and be able to care for my family, have a family to go home to.
Yeah, the Lord has blessed you. It's really interesting to hear about, your church work alongside family life. And you've actually begun a work yourself on social media about family life and bringing faith into family life, sharing that with people and the role of lay people in the church. I'm not putting it as well as you've put it yourself on your Instagram, called The Lay Companion. I'll put a link to it in the episode notes. So tell us a bit about why you started that and what that work is about.
One of my favourite things to do is I really enjoy writing. I do a lot of writing and I don't always get the chance to share it with anyone. I think I've got a knack for bringing Ignatian spirituality into the home. I just think if I can share some of my stories, some of my examples of how I see God in my daily life, then other people might be able to see that as well. That's the whole idea behind it. I'd been meaning to start it for ages, thinking about it and just not doing it. And then actually I was taking my son to his training one night. I was sitting in the car waiting on him. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to start this. Just go with it. And it seems to be going well so far. A lot of people are looking at my posts and content, and I've had a lot of messages from people saying how much it's helped them see God in their daily life, and a few messages from people who were just at the beginning of that journey of trying to find God, who'd kind of not been interested like me for a long time. So that was quite good to hear that it is resonating with people. One of the stories I like to use is with my son Harry. So he's 6, he's autistic, and he has a communication delay, so he doesn't say much. You wonder what's going on, because sometimes he does, he can tell you exactly what it is he wants, and other times he just kind of drags your hand and takes you there. It can be difficult going on a family trip to the cinema. My other boys wanted to go and see the Super Mario movie, and we just thought, this isn't going to work. Harry's going to want to leave after 10 minutes. I said, well, I'll just stay here with him, and my wife took the boys to the cinema. And I thought, I'll watch a film with Harry, and just sat on the couch. We watched Disney Cars. Both of us fell asleep, and he fell asleep kind of on my shoulder. And I stirred at the end of it and woke up, and it was the soundtrack playing at the end. The words were just, suddenly you start to see you're living for someone else. It just spoke to me. Now, for me, that was God speaking directly to me through something that wasn't necessarily in a church or in a cathedral, or it was in a Disney movie, of all things, where you wouldn't expect to find him. But there he was with me in that moment with my son. I just thought, I'm really happy that God has given me this boy to look after and to try and nurture and develop. It's such a gift. And, autism has lots of challenges as well, but he's capable of showing so much love without even saying a word. I find them really inspirational. So it was just in that, and I thought, I need to write that down and tell people about that, because that might not be where you're expecting to see God at the end of a Disney film.
That is beautiful, Andy. There is something about it also resonates with this podcast, that the lives of ordinary Catholics, what we are doing in our lives and how we're trying to live our faith, these are really important things. And it's a wonderful thing to lift up those experiences and share them with each other and help each other to see God in those really ordinary things. And like you say, those things where you think it's not about faith. This is something separate. There's nothing separate from our experience of God. He's everywhere and he speaks to us through those ordinary things. So I think that's a really good work you're involved in there. And I'd encourage listeners to have a little look at your Instagram and read some of those reflections, be inspired and encouraged. Actually, there's an interesting bit in what you were writing that I wanted to bring up, and that was you shared in one of your reflections about bringing our shadows into the light. I found that really interesting, this idea of, I think you said something like, it's not about guilt, it's not about feeling guilty, it's about just bringing our shadows into the light. I wonder if you can remember writing that. Explain that a little bit for listeners.
I think one of the beauties of being a convert to the Catholic Church is I don't have that Catholic guilt that people seem to have. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't seem to share that. I just think that there's parts of our life sometimes that we convince ourselves that God can't touch, but he sees it all. And we just need to bring that out into the open and place ourselves before God, knowing that, basking that unconditional love of God that can permeate into the soul and touch those hidden shadows, the parts that you don't want to show anyone. God knows it all. He's seen it all, and he loves you regardless. It shouldn't be a reason to stop you going into a church because you feel as if there's a part of yourself that you can't show. I'm very much believe in what Pope Francis would say about the church being a field hospital. It's not there for perfect people. It's there for people who know that they're not perfect. They're striving to have God in their life.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if we may talk about your own faith a little bit. What are the things now, as someone who wasn't always a Catholic but have found energy in the church and brought your own energy to join that, I would say? Are there prayers and practices or pieces of scripture that really matter to you, that you come back to, that support your faith?
This is a little embarrassing. So I've worked for the Jesuits for 10.5 years, and it took me about 8 years to get my head round imaginative contemplation.
Okay.
Because I could lead people through it, but I could not for the life of me do it. I was on a spiritual accompaniment course, trained to be a spiritual accompanier a couple of years ago. They were leading us through this imaginative prayer, and I thought, oh great, I'm just going to sit here blank again for the next half an hour. There's a variety of tools and a variety of different ways to pray. And for me, I was just opposed to that one because I'm thinking I can't do it, even though it's one of the ones that Ignatius would use. And we started to go through it. If you don't know what imaginative contemplation is, if anyone that's listening, you essentially insert yourself into a gospel story. You insert yourself into the narrative and you let your imagination go. Something unexpected could happen, which is what happened to me in this situation. And now I love imaginative contemplation. So it was the feeding of the 5,000. So I'm there, I'm thinking, right, okay, this is actually starting to work. I can picture the scene, I can see Jesus. Oh, wait a minute, I'm one of the disciples, right? Why am I? Right, anyway, I'm a disciple. Right, we need to start feeding people. So in my head, I'm doing this, and grab the basket, go to start feeding people, and then Jesus grabs me on the shoulder and stops me. I'm going, that isn't part of the story. And he turns me around and just looks at me, and he's smiling and he's saying, have you had something to eat? And I said, no, I'm trying to feed these people first. He says, how on earth can you feed those people if you haven't had something to eat yourself? And he said, right, come on, I'll help you. I'll make you something, and then we'll go and feed people together. And that just came from nowhere, which is why I know it came from God and came from prayer, because I was not thinking that, and I was terrible at imagination. And in that moment, what had been happening was, so I was going to Mass with my family in the morning, the 3 young boys. That's quite a challenge at times just to even get there. But we get there. But then sometimes Harry is a bit boisterous and you'd have to take him down. So you don't really absorb anything yourself. You're very much there looking after people. Funny story. Harry, who does sometimes talk, decided to talk during the consecration, and when everyone was quiet, and then the priest had said, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, and then Harry starts belting out, brush your teeth. But it was quite funny, but I just thought, oh, good, he spoke. But anyway, do that in the morning, and then we have a young adult mass in the Sunday evening that I work at, that I'm part of the team there. Again, I'm at Mass, I'm in a church, it's all happening in front of me, but I've got jobs to do, I've got responsibilities to take care of again. I'm physically present there, but again, I'm not getting fed spiritually from that. It made me realise I have to make time for myself, because if I don't, I'm just going to get burnt out. And from then, I kind of fell in love with imaginative prayer. It's very hard to do on your own, but luckily the Jesuits have got a great app, Pray As You Go, that can talk you through the whole process. I find that very life-giving and a way to communicate with God that fills me with energy again.
That is fantastic, Andy. And there are so many guests on this podcast who have found Ignatian spirituality really helpful, who have mentioned Pray As You Go. I think the Jesuits, the Lord is working through them amazingly over the years to bring the gospel to people and help people build a relationship with God. So it's great to hear about that. I think the bit about having jobs to do at Mass, I can really identify with that in different times in my life where I've had roles that have involved me needing to do things during Mass. You know, you can very easily miss out on some spiritual nourishment for yourself. And that can be just looking after your family, as you say. Been there too. I'm sure it's the same for lots of listeners too. It's really interesting that that's what the Lord finally got through to you in imaginative prayer. I asked you before we began recording about this idea of a revival of the church, a revival of faith across the Western world. Some numbers have been bandied about. People are wondering whether that's really happening. And I was just wondering what's happening in Scotland and whether you've something to add there about young people in Scotland, particularly coming back to the church. Tell us a bit about what's going on where you are then.
Just after COVID again, as things were starting to open up and things were starting to come back into some type of routine, I had a flurry of people wanting to become Catholic and contacted me and emailed me. And I create and deliver the RCIA programme at Sacred Heart in Edinburgh. I was going to the team meetings every week and saying to Father Adrian, I've got somebody else, or somebody else, somebody else, somebody else. You know, the groups was just getting bigger, and they were all young adults. They were all in their 20s and 30s, and they were seeking something that they weren't finding in the church. And I think Ignatian spirituality perhaps spoke to them. I think the history of the church probably spoke to them as well, and the apostolic succession. And we had an overwhelming number of people received into the church that year. Pre-COVID, it was maybe 6 or 7, and now we're looking at 20, 25 numbers. The same thing happened again this year. Again, majority young adults. So RCIA has been growing and growing and growing, and I get emails constantly from young people. Usually people just finished university or maybe a bit more sure about themselves and maybe not as embarrassed to admit that they've got a faith. They ask to come and speak to me and we talk through things. And so we run our RCIA course. So the last 2 years there's been around 50 young adults received into the church. But on top of that, we as a parish team made a conscious decision to focus on young adult ministry. It's one of the apostolic preferences for the Jesuits is to work with young people for a hope-filled future. So we adjusted the time of our 8 p.m. Mass, we made it 7 o'clock, and we just started, and we had a social afterwards for people to get to know each other and so on. We had about 8 people there, and it wasn't going great. And we having a team meeting saying, right, we're going to give this another week and see how it goes. And then all of a sudden, people showed up. To now about 140 to 160 people coming to Mass on a Sunday evening at Sacred Heart, and then about maybe 50 or 60 staying afterwards, just to be a community together, just to talk to each other, get to know each other, just offering that hospitality and that opportunity for young Catholics to meet each other has been really helpful. We've also managed to get a few people come through that way into RCIA as well, so they found a pathway in. But now we've got a very active young adult programme, so when I say young adult, I mean 20s and 30s. We've had 2 pilgrimages to Rome, which Father David Stewart has done, working with the Jesuits in Glasgow as well, and this year with the Jesuits in London as a big kind of team. We're doing a retreat in Barmouth this summer. We have 3 retreats in daily life that we do each year. If you don't know what a retreat in daily life is, it's not about emptying your schedule and having nothing to do and going on a nice retreat. It's about how do you work prayer into your actual daily life? How do you see God in your work or raising your family and so on, or just going about your daily business? So those are always fully booked. We have our first Sunday circle on the first Sunday of a month where we do theological talks and we have guests in to speak to young adults. And so I would say that there's very much a revival of the faith, and it's really good to see. It means that there's a lot more work for me, but it's a good problem to have. A couple of years ago, sometimes you could look at things and go, it's a bit empty, it's the same people here all the time, and you've got the same people doing the same jobs. And then all of a sudden now, you've got people lining up to try and enter the church, try and get involved. We also have our young adult charity, which we link in with the Bethany Christian Trust in Edinburgh. And we have the care van where a team of our young adults go out on an evening and they drive around the city of Edinburgh and they kind of take soup and sandwiches to people who are homeless. And got a really good, thriving community in Edinburgh for young adults now.
Well, it's fantastic to hear about the Holy Spirit working in Edinburgh. I think we are hearing that around Britain, that in some churches there is a real surge of young people coming forward, interested in finding out about the faith, practicing their faith more regularly. That is encouraging to hear about. Thank you. Listen, thanks for spending some time talking today. It sounds like you're super busy with your work for the church and your growing family, but it's been really encouraging to hear about the wonderful things happening in your life and with your family and also in Edinburgh among Catholic young people. That's the second time now that Carfin Grotto has been mentioned. John Patrick from Sancta Familia mentioned it last time, and now you've mentioned it as well. It must be good there. I'll perhaps go and do an episode and share with listeners who don't have a chance to go to see what it's like and what it's all about. I liked your explanation of retreats in daily life too. I think I knew what that was, and yet you've explained it in a way that I don't think I did think that's what it was. So that's been helpful. So thank you so much for sharing so honestly about your faith journey and family life, busy work. Thanks so much for your time today, Andy.
That's great. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the invitation, and I've had a wonderful morning with you.
Thanks so much for joining me on All Kinds of Catholic this time. I hope today's conversation has resonated with you. A new episode is released each Wednesday, and you can follow All Kinds of Catholic on the usual podcast platforms. Rate and review to help others find it. You can also follow us on social media at Kinds of Catholic. And remember, if you connect with us on Substack, you can comment on episodes and share your thoughts and be part of the dialogue there. Until the next time.